Welcome everyone to the Summer 23 meeting of Books and Brunch with. We really appreciate that you registered for this event, and even more so, that you are here with us on this Sunday afternoon. I'm Jana Long. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance. And so happy to represent an amazing collective of people who teach yoga and share wellness in so many communities to support wellness, our health, our development, and help us to reach our highest potential. Books and Brunch with BYTA are member-produced and hosted events. So BYTA members volunteer to share these events with you. They select the authors, the books, curate the questions, etc., and then just have a team behind to help produce this hour-long meeting. I'd like to thank, speaking of thanking people who are part of this, there's the BYTA administrative team, the BYTA board of directors who do a lot to contribute to our being able to bring Books and Brunch. And in that regard, I would like to offer a special thanks to Galanda Brooker, who serves as our associate producer and technical advisor for Books and Brunch, and to our creative services director, Lorenzo Wilkins, who does all of our beautiful graphic work and music and videos and photographs and so much more. So just want to thank them and acknowledge them so you'll know who's behind the scenes making this happen. Today's Books and Brunch with is produced and hosted by a member in Houston, Dr. Jennifer Bourgeois. Jennifer is a professor of criminal justice and who has a passion for social justice, criminal justice reform, and yoga. Jennifer has a doctorate degree in the administration of justice, from the Administration of Justice Department at Texas Southern University. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Forensic Science from Baylor University and a Master of Science degree in Criminal Justice from Sam Houston State University. She also has over 10 years practitioner experience working in the criminal justice field. Jennifer is a certified yoga teacher and is dedicated to service with an emphasis on the intersection of yoga and social justice. She currently teaches yoga through a trauma-informed lens to incarcerated, pregnant, and postpartum women at a residential treatment facility in the Houston area. When Jennifer's not teaching yoga, criminal justice, she enjoys reading, traveling, and spending time with friends and family. She also does some writing for the BYTA blog, and is a very active member of Black Yoga Teachers Alliance. So we're just so happy to have you with us today, Jennifer. Thank you so much for producing this meeting today.
Thank you so much, Jana, for that amazing introduction. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over these last several months, and I always look forward to our chats, once a month where we get on the phone and connect. And I'm so glad for this opportunity to lead this book discussion. I was very excited and when I reached out to you several months ago and was like, I want to lead a books and brunch, and I told you who I wanted to, whose book I wanted to choose and all that kind of stuff. And you have been a tremendous amount of help. So thank you so much, Jana, for that lovely introduction. I would also like to thank the BYTA team, the BYTA board of directors, and BYTA members. So thank y'all all for being here this lovely afternoon. And I'm so excited to get the chance to introduce our amazing author for the day. I was first introduced to Michelle Cassandra Johnson's work through her book Skill in Action a couple of years ago, and it just lit me up on fire. And from that, I began to follow her work and everything. So I'm so glad to introduce her and to welcome her today. So I'll start off with her bio. Michelle Cassandra Johnson is an author, a yoga teacher, a social justice activist, a licensed clinical social worker, and dismantling racism trainer. She approaches her life and work from a place of empowerment, embodiment, and integration with a deep understanding of trauma and the impact that it has on the mind, body, spirit, and heart. Much of her work focuses on helping people better understand how power and privilege operate in their life. She explores how privilege, power, and oppression affects the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, and energy body. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree from the College of William and Mary and a master's degree in social work from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And today I'm so excited to introduce her so we can dive into her latest book, We Heal Together. I'm so excited. So thank you so much and welcome, Michelle. And did I leave anything out of your bio that you would like to add to it and share with us?
No, it was great. Thank you for the sweet welcome and introduction, Jennifer, and for bringing us together in this way. And thank you, Jana. It's so good to see you, and to BYTA and the BYTA team and everyone who's here to be part of this conversation and discussion. I'm really delighted to be in this space right now. So thank you so much.
You're so very welcome. So we're gonna jump straight into it. We only have a limited amount of time, and I'm so excited to dive into this book. I don't know about most people on the call, but I am a book tabber. I'm the kind of person that highlights, underlines, all that kind of good stuff. So we're gonna dive straight into it. So my very first question is, can you share some personal experiences or a story that has shaped your journey as an author and healer, and possibly how those experiences influence some of the themes and messages in We Heal Together?
Thank you, Jennifer. I love this question about our shaping and specifically related to identifying myself as an author, which has taken a while. Um, Even now, there's a little discomfort with it for me because I didn't really know I was going to write Skill in Action. And then after that, I didn't know I was going to be writing other books and offerings in this way. And there is an old story in me from the educational system about not being a good writer. And so it took a while to embrace what it means to be a writer or an author and to identify myself in this way. So I would say that's part of my shaping, is like working through that narrative and releasing it, because I can hold a book that I saw you hold up and Jana hold up, and I know several others on this call have. Um, and I can lean into what a gift it is to be a channel in this way and allow wisdom and words to move through me. So that's one thing that shaped me. The other is I was a really curious um, child and a really sensitive child. And I think I had an awareness I was living in an unhealed world. I don't mean to suggest that everyone uh, needs to heal in the same way or has had the same experiences, but I think I was aware that something was had been disrupted and that people didn't have what they needed. And it raised a lot of questions for me, which I know these questions have shaped both Skill in Action and We Heal Together, and then Finding Refuge, my second book about grief. I was curious about disconnection and why we were disconnected, or I was perceiving disconnection in many different ways. I was concerned about the planet. I was concerned about systems, because I was in an educational system and one of the few Black students in my class from first grade through 10th grade, and then I switched schools. And I was certainly treated differently than the white students who went to that school. And that was a big part of my shaping, right? Because that was such a long time in my life of being in that setting. And so I had just had this awareness that there was a lot of healing to do. Although it's taken time to be on this path of evolution with identifying how I want to create healing space. And then there are other influences, but the two other influences I want to name are, I've been a dismantling racism or racial equity educator for over 2 decades. And this is in direct response to being in a Black body in America and a white supremacy culture, and all of the ways white supremacy and other systems are designed to fragment us, to annihilate us, to disconnect us, to oppress us. And in the many settings I've been in offering dismantling racism training, or transformative work is what I would say, it's in response to the fragmentation that systems like white supremacy create. And so that certainly influenced the stories that I have told about who I am, or about my perception and experience as I move about the world in this particular body. And then finally, and this is really, it's true of every book I've written, but it's very true for We Heal Together. I want to call in my ancestors, and specifically my grandmother, Dorothy, because she influenced We Heal Together. It feels like her book, feels like her words moved through me. I've been saying, from the cover, which has oak leaves and acorns on it and tree rings, to the words throughout and the images throughout, it feels like she assigned me. It was her ancestral assignment for me to write this book. And she is an ancestor who is around me all of the time in ways that I can feel very deeply. And so while I'm calling her in, there's a story about my great grandmother Angie, and We Heal Together too. And so just want to say that, the biggest influence on me, I would say, is my ancestors, and them manifesting me in this form at this time to offer these gifts now. So that's a little bit about the journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was probably one of the favorite parts in the book, when you talked about your grandmother, your great grandmother. I was extremely close to my grandmother as well, and I still have her handmade quilts that I still smell her scent on and stuff. And it's something about those grandmothers that, whew, it just stays with us. So, and I'm going to bring that up in a little bit later as well. My second question is about healing. And you mentioned that word throughout the entire book, and obviously in the title of the book. So, how would you define healing in the context of your book? And how does it go beyond the traditional understanding of physical or emotional recovery?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to say, since you mentioned the quilts, that I have quilts from my great grandmother that she made. I have 3 of her quilts, and then one of them was damaged because it's 100 years old. And so my grandmother Dorothy repaired it for my birthday about 8 years ago, and so I have that quilt. So there was deep resonance when you said that. There is something about the grandmothers and the great grandmothers, and being able to hold things they created or that held us, right? So I wanted to name that. So your question is about healing and what it means, and I think how to deepen our understanding of it beyond recovery. I do talk some about recovery in the introduction of We Heal Together, and in particular, the time we're in right now with moving through, I don't feel like the pandemic is over. And so I'm like, we're still moving through this. And I certainly don't feel like the healing that we need to do in response to that has been done, right? It's not complete. And so I talk about the risk of bypassing recovery and what is required, and not just connected to COVID, but connected to all these systems of oppression that are in place that are causing harm and disconnection in the way that I spoke about a few minutes ago. And I think about healing broadly and often talk about it as, yes, the healing we need to do as individuals. And most of what I focus on is the healing that we need to do as a collective and practice as a collective. And We Heal Together is really offered in the spirit of us being in community, moving through rituals, remembering how to be in community, engaging in ceremony with one another, something like what we're doing to get today, even though we're on screens and not physically in space together, but creating a sacred space with one another. And the reason that We Heal Together focuses on this kind of healing, which is more about community and collective healing, is because I feel like inherent to who we are. And when I think about our true nature, and when I think about ancestors, we were meant to be in community with one another. We weren't separate, like a system like capitalism would suggest, right? Or a system like white supremacy would suggest, and certainly replicates a pattern of disconnection and separation, and makes us believe we're separate. But that was never true. And so We Heal Together I keep saying it's a call for us, and I think this is true for most of my work, a call for us to remember. And this is like, how do we remember that our true nature is actually to be deeply interconnected with one another, interdependent on one another? And how do we remember our true nature is to be deeply interconnected, not just with humans, but every living thing, and all that has been, is now, and will be. So to me, this feels like a way to enhance how we might think about healing within systems. And systems exist within this context of dominance and superiority, but beyond that, what was actually our true nature, and how do we return to that? So that's a little bit about healing. And there are so many different access points and practices within We Heal Together for people who are trying to come into community, to remember what community means to them, for folks who want to commune with the natural world, for people who want to practice with just one person, and then people who want to be in ceremony with 20 people. So I tried to create enough access points for people to enter into this process of healing, while also inviting people to think about their own healing journey. And if I think about mine, it's not separate from community, right? There are other people who are healing from similar things to the things that I'm healing from. We're all having an experience of, and have had an experience of, collective loss and trauma, and are trying to heal from that. And it's an ongoing process. So I just never think about us as separate, even though dominant culture wants me to believe that. That's not true to who I and we are.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that. Kind of keeping on that same kind of track about healing, one of the key themes in your book that you mentioned is the connection between healing and social justice. And social justice kind of is threaded through several of your books. So, how do you see those two concepts intertwine, healing and social justice? And how can individuals engage in healing practices while also working towards creating a more just and equitable society?
Mhm. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to answer this question. So there are two things I'll say. One is, and I just saw I see skill in action in the background, Jennifer.
And I
So
have the revised version as well. See, the revised one is all tabbed
all the
up.
stickies. I know, I see that. That's so, yeah, it's a much deeper dive. So I'm going to call skill and action into this space because it is about yoga and social justice and these systems that we've been talking about, and the systems that you are working within all the time based on what you do in the world. And I feel like skill and action was a call for us to think about how exclusive the industry of wellness and yoga is, and who we're leaving out, and how that mirrors every other system, and why that's happening, and how it's antithetical to the practice of yoga to be exclusive in this way. And for many people, skill and action felt like people kept saying, thanks for telling the truth. Like, people would come up to me and say that's right. And other people would say, thanks for telling the truth, and feel disrupted by it, depending on their identities and their positionality and their points of privilege. So I feel like it created this disruption within the industry of wellness, and a call and an invitation for people to respond and show up differently. And then I think finding refuge was like, oh, once we're disrupted and we understand the world is not as we thought it was, there's going to be grief that's stirring because we're implicated in some way in these. And we heal together as, okay, from that place of consciousness raising, of reckoning, and then the loss that we're acknowledging, how do we come into community with one another? And so each one is about social justice. And as I think about, the second way I want to answer your question is, as I think about healing and social justice, what we're fighting for is in response to these dominant cultural norms, these systems of superiority, the hierarchy of bodies that has been created. Like that, this is what we are responding to, the way that we might believe we are broken, when in fact that's not true, but systems try to break us, right? On purpose, very intentionally, again and again. I feel like what many of us who are in movement work, organizing work, transformative work, healing work, spiritual work, what we're doing is responding to the way these systems try to break us, that they actively work to break us. And so that feels like a natural intersection of healing and social justice, because what we're calling for in our movement work is wholeness. And healing feels rooted in wholeness, and remembering our wholeness, and putting conditions in place for everyone to have what they need to be whole within this particular context, in this realm that we're in. So that is the, there's more, but that's like if I said one thing about healing and justice, it would be in the intersection that we are responding to what has been taken. We are responding to being told we are broken. We are responding to systems break us. And finding ways to heal individually and collectively in spite of these systems. And we've been doing this for, and I'm saying we, people, generations, ancestors have been doing this for quite some time. So that's the intersection for me. And the final thing I'll say is that I always talk about in my racial equity work and any organizing work that relationship is the antidote to systems like white supremacy. If we put relationships first, if we center relationship, if we see our humanity, our shared humanity, if we recognize how sacred we are and precious, and not just humans, but every living being, that this is what dominant culture does not want us to do, right? It wants us to be transactional. It wants us to continue to dehumanize one another. It wants us to mine and extract from the earth. It wants us to take in the way that I was describing about how systems break us and we're part of systems. And so we heal together in particular because it's a call to be in community, feels like it's connected to relationships being an antidote to white supremacy and to dominance, because that's about remembering who we are to each other. So that's what I'll say.
Okay, you mentioned several things in that. I mean, you mentioned the word grief again, in the healing process. So in your book, you discuss the importance of acknowledging and honoring grief, and how can individuals navigate their grief in a way that supports their healing process and fosters resilience. So that kind of also goes back to skill and action and how you got to We Heal Together, and this healing process from all the things that was mentioned and brought to awareness in skill and action, and now we're in the healing process collectively. How can individuals navigate their grief in a way that supports their healing process and foster resilience?
Mm-hmm. I did a book reading in Seattle the other night, on Friday, and someone said, because there's an entire chapter about ancestors in We Heal Together, and they're weaved in throughout, really, if I'm clear. But there's a chapter specifically about how do we work with our ancestors, where are you from, which also feels connected to some of my other work. And she said, you mentioned the word resilience, and she said, thank you for supporting us and remembering the resilience our ancestors embodied. And grief and resilience and grief and liberation feel connected to me. And I've written some about the connection between grief and liberation. We heal together in that if we actually process what needs to move through and honor what we've lost, there is some space that's created for us to be free. And there also is a way that we will not continue to replicate what is causing grief, as much as we have the power to do that if we honor the losses we've experienced. And there's individual grieving, and I mentioned the collective grief. And I think grief is complicated. I think we're all feeling it, although we may be feeling it differently, and we may not want to feel some of it. And I also think the magnitude of what we've been moving through is just too much. It's too much. And within that, what I think about for myself is, as I respond to the overwhelm in the world and my own overwhelm, that the resilience that my ancestors instilled in me is moving through me. It's alive right now. It's in my blood, my cells, my tissues, my heartbeat. It is flowing through me, and not just me, but others. And so remembering resilience isn't something I have to create. It's inside me. And when I remember, whether it's resilience, or people might use other words, whether that's divinity, they're not necessarily, I don't think about them the same way, but I do think about them as being interconnected to one another. When I remember there's something bigger than this experience in this body at this time, when I remember my ancestral lineage, when I remember how much grief they faced, if I think about my grandmother, I think about my great grandmother, my great 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 grandparents, and yet they still survived, persisted, birthed, labored, celebrated, danced, laughed, right? Like, this feels like the connection to grief and moving through it, and remembering that there's something else we are experiencing at the same time. And often when I think about grief, I also think about what we risk when we don't make the space to grieve. And so I feel like it's essential for us, and some of the rituals in We Heal Together speak to how do we, and Finding Refuge, my second book, how do we engage a practice or practices to grieve, to remember our resilience, to remember our divinity, to remember our connection to one another. And finally, what I'll say is grief can feel heavy. It can overwhelm the system. I've written about in We Heal Together and Finding Refuge, a moment when that happened for me, where I felt like I was in pieces and didn't know how I would come back into wholeness. And there have been other moments like that. And I think about grief as an ongoing process, not a state of being. So I just want to offer that for me, it's like waves of, I'm in it in this way, and then the intensity of it subsides, and then there's something else that happens, and then it subsides, or I am able to engage a practice that can support me, or community who can support me. It feels like it's ongoing and part of what it means to be alive on the planet, but it's not the only thing that is happening right now. So it's when people are in that grieving process, individually and collectively, remembering, as I said, what is beyond this moment, or what is happening in addition to, which spiritual practice invites us into this kind of inquiry. This is happening. I'm feeling this sensation. It is not the whole of my experience. This is how I feel about grief.
And also kind of going a little bit more detail about resilience and our ancestors. And another term that reoccurred throughout your book was about storytelling. And when I think about storytelling, I just think about oral history, and I think about all the stories, in addition to the physical blankets that my grandmother passed down to me, but also those stories. And when you're a little girl, you hear those stories, then when you get older, you really lean into and you really miss those times of those stories. So can you elaborate just a little bit more about, you know, the influence that storytelling has when it comes to our ancestors and dealing with grief and embracing resilience?
Hmm. I will bring in Angie, my great grandmother, for this. And the chapter about Angie is about lineage and legacy. And um, I'll just share a little bit about it as an answer to your question. Um, I had a reading, sort of intuitive reading that someone was doing for me. And she asked me where I was from, and I called in different ancestors, including Angie, my great grandmother, and answered about geography and the land I was from too, and then sort of went beyond that and like the earth and everything, right? The cosmos. And the way that I described my great grandmother, Angie, was quite different than the way I described my father, my grandmothers, my grandfathers. The way I described her was as the conditions that were in place. And she was born, her parents were enslaved, and she was born enslaved. So that's one thing I named about her when this person asked me where I was from. And I named some about Angie related to her, what I believe was dementia, although I was a young child. I'm not sure, but I think that's what she was experiencing before she transitioned, and her moving in and out of lucidity and reality in this realm. And the intuitive healer said, you described her as her conditions and everyone else as like, my grandmother loved to garden, right? I said these things about Angie that were about what was in place, but not about who she was. And I mean, when this person said this to me, it was my whole mind and heart expanded. And I was kind of like, I've been describing Angie in this way forever. And what does it mean to minimize someone to the conditions that are in place or the constraints that are in place that she didn't even create for herself? My systems did that to her and to her parents. And it made me think about story in the way that you asked this question, and how we tell story and narrative and the way we describe um, other people, the conditions that are in place, the narratives we hold about ourselves. And it invited me into storytelling beyond the narrative that systems of oppression create for us. I think it was a reminder, that moment of like, I talk about us being bigger than the conditions in place all the time, and yet I'm describing my great grandmother as the conditions. What does this mean? And so I feel like story is so important, and there are so many narratives we do not get to control. And what I'll offer is that, the story I have about myself as a human alive at this time in this body, in this Black body, with many identities, trying to navigate the world and make an offering that will be a contribution, and trying to pay homage to my ancestors as I'm in this space. I want to think about how to really lean into the story I hold about myself and what is true versus the story dominant culture has created for me. There's a lot of grief connected to what is happening to me and people who are like me, and Black people and BIPOC people and people who are less proximal to power. And there's a lot of resilience in remembering who I am, truly. So I'll invite us to think about that. Like, what story do we want to tell about who we are beyond the conditions that are in place?
Fantastic. Yeah. So, shifting a little bit into some of the key terms that you mentioned throughout the book, and one of those terms is rituals. So, I would love for you to kind of explain or define what ritual means in the context of the book, as well as you mentioned that rituals play a significant role in healing practices, and you mentioned several throughout your book. So if you could provide an example of rituals that individuals can incorporate into their lives to promote healing, similar to the ones that you mentioned in the book.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So ritual to me feels connected to intention and practice and elemental energy, and an awareness that there's something bigger than me. Ritual feels connected to heart, and it as well. Um, and it feels like I've been in many spaces where it feels as if people are moving through what they call rituals, but there's no heart and there's no acknowledgement of spirit. And that doesn't feel like ceremony to me, or ritual. It feels like sort of doing something with one's body and not sure why we're doing it, right? Or calling in the cardinal directions, but not really sure. I do want to say that because I'm someone who is learning about many different rituals, I'm in a shamanic program or mentorship program right now for the next year, and learning from different lineages, that it takes time to work with ritual in an intentional way. So I do want to acknowledge that I might feel like I'm calling in the directions and I've only done it once, and so I really don't know how to do it. What I'm going to invite us into is thinking about why we do that, right? Why we would call in the directions or the above and below, or whatever language people might use to describe the energies that you want to call in, or why are we calling in the ancestors, or why are we casting a circle of protection around us, or why are one of the practices in We Heal Together is to write a vow, a prayer connected to our healing, collective healing. Why would we do that? And how do we do it in a prayerful way with deep intention? So ritual feels like, it has felt for me as if it's been guided by spirit, and from the heart. And I will say that many of the practices and rituals in We Heal Together are um, practices I have moved through, and some were just channeled. They just came through me as the practice for the chapter about ancestors, or about never leaving anyone behind, or there's a chapter about the honeybees where people get to create it's the final chapter, their own ritual and think about the offering they want to make based on what they've moved through, and We Heal Together. There's a practice about elemental energy, fire, air, earth, and water, and above and below, and how these energies move through us. And much like what I was sharing about access points earlier, I think there are many access points with the practices, and so many different types of practices. So one may resonate with someone and they might come back to the ritual over and over, or they might decide they want to move through a few. And earlier, when I named that, the community piece of this feels just true to who we are, the ritual piece of this in community feels true to who we are as well. Because if we all trace our lineage, if we were able to do that, or if you have done that, or if you imagine tracing back in your lineage, you are going to find that people engaged fire, earth, air, water, right? That they were working with the stars, the above and the below, the center of the earth, that they were calling in gods and goddesses and deities and energies, that they believed in the mystery and the void and something that was bigger, that this also is true to who we are. And so engaging in ritual is a process of remembering as well, much like how can we be in community? And most of these rituals were done in community. We weren't doing them in isolation in our homes, right? We were doing them together. So that's what I think about ritual and what it means to me, and why the remembering of it is essential for this time.
Thank you for that. Um, yeah, as that word kept popping up, it made me just think about some of the rituals or intentions that I had with my grandmother growing up. And sometimes you don't realize some rituals that you have. And I didn't realize that until later on in life, and how every morning I have a cup of coffee. And I don't even think it's because I really enjoy coffee. It's just literally since kindergarten, I started drinking coffee. That was my grandmother's way. That's how we connected. So before going to school, I had this cup of coffee at the age of 5 or 6, preparing to go to school and stuff. So now that's like what I do in the morning. Have this coffee, have this alone time, just to kind of sit and think through things. But I never thought of that necessarily as a ritual until I started kind of reading through the book. And I was like, I kind of have my own rituals that I practice, as well as it brings into that connection that I still have with my grandmother. It's something about when I have that coffee every morning that I just feel this sense of calmness. And when I don't have that coffee or quiet time in the morning, I feel off balance throughout the day. So it just kind of made me smile as I was sitting and reading the book and drinking my coffee. And it's like, this is my way to still connect with my grandmother every morning. So thank you for sharing that in your book. You also mentioned some other key terms in your book that really stood out to me: cancel culture, calling out, calling in, and calling on. So the first one I kind of want to talk about is cancel culture. And you talk about the concept of cancel culture is complex and a debated topic. And in your book, you address its impact on healing spaces. So how do you define cancel culture, and how does it affect our collective healing?
Yeah, our grandmothers must be drinking coffee together because my grandmother drank coffee as well every morning. My mother didn't, and so that's who I saw my grandmother drink coffee. And I'm drinking a cup of coffee right now. And I'm going to answer about cancel culture. And something came to me when you were talking about your grandmother and coffee, and we were talking about ritual. Um, there's a chapter in the book about how we come into sacred space together or community together, and it is called communion. And it's also making me think about your question about storytelling. When I sat to write that chapter, I did not know what story I was going to tell. And when I sat and thought about where is the space that you learned about coming into community, the story of communion is what came to me. That is not what I had written out in my book proposal. It's not what I said. It is the story my grandmother wanted me to tell about growing up in a Black Baptist church, and the experience of witnessing people take communion, and then my own experience of that in that holy place, um, and that safe haven for us and our community. And so I just wanted to call that in because that is where I experienced ritual, right? It's the first place that I believe I experienced that kind of ritual, right? There were my routines or my ritual in the morning that I would do, but this was like in community with one another. And so I just wanted to call that in. And the chapter that cancel culture, calling it out in on, where those things are, is in a chapter about my friend Cynthia Brown, who transitioned in 2016. She was a colleague and beloved, and everyone in her community and beyond loved her. And she had pancreatic cancer, and that is what made her transition at the time. And when she was transitioning, I was not in the room with her, but 7 women were around her. And what she said before she transitioned is never leave anyone behind. It was one of the final things she offered, the medicine she offered to us, and so representative of Cynthia's spirit. And so that chapter is this invitation to think about the things that get in the way of us calling in people, right? Remembering we are kin and interconnected and from one another, really. And I break down this definition of cancel culture and then go into calling out in on. And there are many definitions of cancel culture. The reason that I wrote about it in this chapter of not leaving people behind is because part of what I am witnessing is this pattern, which is it feels rooted in dominant cultural patterns and in the replication of it, but this pattern of believing that we can actually cancel one another. I want to be clear. There are corporations, there are problematic individuals, there are people who are doing horrific things and perpetuating oppression and violence and war. Like, all of this is real, and I want to act as if that's not real. I'm not suggesting that we should not be discerning in how we actually engage with those folks and systems. I actually do think we need to be discerning. And there are times where we need to organize movements, and we are, to respond to the ways in which individuals and groups of people and systems are actively and systemically trying to annihilate us. So I want folks to understand I have that awareness. And when I think about never leaving anyone behind, it feels like a spiritual teaching. It feels like oh, this is what yoga taught me too. If we're connected in this way, what does it mean about what I'm willing to risk, or how I'm willing to be in connection with people? So I'm inviting people to hold multiple truths, that there are all of these patterns that we might be organizing around and calling people out and trying to dismantle and disrupt. I'm part of that too. And what does it mean to be oriented to the spiritual teaching about not leaving people behind, or our oneness, or our interconnectedness? That's what I'll invite people in. And my question is, I don't know if I can cancel people. Like, I don't actually know if that's possible, given that I'm in deep relationship with people, whether or not I would like to be. Again, I'm inviting us to think like strategic and to organize, to dismantle and disrupt. And if I think about social media, there's like within a day, somebody can be canceled, right? Um, and by people who don't know that person, don't know their lives, don't know what is, like, that can happen. And I've just seen it so much, and it's just made me question. And it feels connected to social media in a lot of ways, but it happens in other ways, in organizing spaces. It happens as well. Like, what are we doing when we believe we can cancel each other? I guess I'm just curious, like, what is that, given that we are interconnected in the way that yoga teaches us? Again, discernment, boundaries, all of these things are important. So I feel like cancel culture is this belief that we can actually be, and this is not the definition in the book, but it's what I'm saying to you now, that it's rooted in a belief that we're separate, such that I can say you don't exist. And I don't think that's the way I've just seen it. Not. It feels like it's ineffective. And the fear people have about being canceled, it's just like a whole thing. I'm kind of like, this is not, is this who we want to be to each other? I think is my question. And then, the skills of calling in, calling out, calling on, calling out can be connected to cancel culture, but also can be like, you are operating in this way, person or system or organization or company. And we're going to raise awareness about what you're doing so that we can shut it down, so that we can burn it down, so that we can disrupt it, so that we can dismantle it. Or calling somebody out in a space who has said something that is in violation of agreements, or calling out someone who's causing harm in a space. Calling in is different in that if I'm willing to call someone in, usually there's space for growth. There is a relationship with that person. It may not be a deep or long-term relationship, but a relationship with that person. That the conditions exist within the space for me to call them in and for us to do repair work. Like, that is not always possible, but that's how I think about calling in as I've practiced it. That I recognize I want to give feedback to that person so they don't do it again, whatever they did to cause harm. But there has to be like room for that, and calling on is less direct than calling in my experience, and it also requires less labor. Actually, emotional labor. Calling on can, someone says something problematic in a space, and you might say, oh, can you just like say that again so you can hear yourself, or to ask a clarifying question, right? So the person can really reflect on, why did I do that? Calling on is a bit different than calling in, and less laborious than calling out. But cancel culture is the question I have, like, can we cancel each other? I think that's why I wrote about it, especially in response to this gift Cynthia gave us about not leaving people behind.
That was definitely one of my favorite chapters. Another question I have relates to the journal. So, in addition to this amazing book, you also created a journal that goes along with it. So, I want to ask you about what inspired you to create the journal. How do you envision people using it as a tool? And maybe can you share like an example of a journal, a prompt for from the journal?
Yeah, so the journal, it's available to anyone. And originally it was, when We Heal Together was available for pre-order, I had some pre-order incentives, and one was this journal, and the other was access to a book club facilitated by many different people. And I'm facilitating the final session of that. Um, and the journal includes some practices and some We Heal Together. But in addition, there are other journaling prompts and practices that are in the journal. And so it feels like a companion to We Heal Together. And it explores themes like the natural world and ritual, the themes we talked about, and not leaving anyone behind, and ancestors. It doesn't include every practice from We Heal Together, but it has some things that are not in We Heal Together. So I feel like it can be used alongside it. There are so many journaling prompts in We Heal Together and in the journal as well. And an example of one of the journaling prompts is, and it's based on chapter 1 of We Heal Together. What does community mean to you, right? Who are you in communion with, or who are you in community with, and beyond, or in addition to this, right? Who are you in community with? There are journaling prompts about the natural world and healing. The natural world has been one of the most my most profound teachers, and it just feels expansive in a way that sometimes things, when I'm grieving or things feel overwhelming, things narrow, and the natural world is expansive. So there are things about what can we learn from the natural world. There are questions about ritual and what ritual means to you. I shared what it means to me, but what does it mean to you? And what role does it play in your life? Similar to the cup of coffee you were talking about in your grandmother. And there are questions about our collective healing. I mean, We Heal Together is my take on why we need to heal now, and some suggestions around how we can heal. But there's an invitation for readers in this journal to reflect on, why do we need to heal now? How is our individual, how are our individual and collective healing? How are these things intertwined? What is the connection between the two? So there are a lot of different themes in there. And there's also a prompt about your role in creating space for collective healing on the planet at this time. Because there's a chapter 8, as I said, about the honeybees. I'm a beekeeper. So it's about the honeybees and healing the hive, and alchemy. And the journal, and the journaling prompt about alchemy is like, what alchemy do we bring forth at this time? What is your role in creating a space for collective healing? So I encourage people, you can go to the website and just in the link for We Heal Together under the books tab, and you'll see a link to the electronic journal, and you can download the PDF and use it for yourself. You can use the journaling prompts and share them in community and work that you're doing or practice. You can bring them into your classes if you're teaching movement or yoga, or any sort of communal ritual or practice. So that's a little about the journal.
Awesome. And one other quick question about the journal is, do you have any recommendations for readers who may be new to journaling or self-reflection?
Yeah, I feel like I'm one of these people, even though I write books, I don't journal very much, even though I've created 1,000 journaling prompts.
Journals all over my office, and they're like, I'll start one day, stop, write a couple days. So, any tips you have for us?
Yeah, I'm one of those people. So and I always admire people who like journal every morning as part of, I meditate every morning, but like journal as part of their practice. I write gratitude statements in my journal, but I'm not like writing out my thoughts. So all that to say, I think if journaling is new or you want to revisit it and it's an old practice for you, but you haven't done it in a while, just to start small. Like maybe you journal for a minute and sort of free write, or maybe you take one prompt and reflect on it for 5 minutes. So it's not like I need to journal for 30 minutes today. That I would not work well with that. Um, and I do find prompts are very helpful initially for people, and then they can free write and do whatever they want to do or draw or whatever it might be, like allowing yourself to be creative in response and not critiquing. And I've had some good teachers in different settings invite me to journal and write and don't pick up the like just continuous writing, and often that's timed. Um, and then to go back and read it and pull out pieces of it and write on that theme and pull out pieces. I love that kind of process. And each piece of that is timed, and that it's not about critiquing the writing. It's like you're releasing as you journal, you're revealing things as you journal, you're gathering your thoughts as you journal, to think about it that way. So it's not about being perfect. Like that's not, it's a contemplative practice, journaling is. It's a self-reflective practice. So engaging it in that way.
One final question. So, finally, as a reader, I have found a tremendous amount of inspiration and insight from your books, especially Skill in Action. That one just, it was just amazing to see that I was able to kind of find a way to take my passions for criminal justice and yoga and wellness and social justice and merge that together. And then there's a whole book about it. I mean, that was just mind blowing to me. So I'm curious to know, I'm pretty sure other readers know, what's next for you as an author and as an activist? Are there any upcoming projects or areas of focus that you're excited to explore that you would like to share with your readers?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So something that's coming up is I have another book coming out on August 8th. It is it's published by Beacon Press, and it is called A Space for Us, um, a guide for leading Black, Indigenous, and people of color affinity groups. And I'm very excited about it because it is for BIPOC people. And I've led affinity groups for many, I mean, a long 2 decades, as long as I've been um, leading racial equity work, and participated in affinity groups prior to leading and co-leading the work. And I am so excited about it. I can put the link in chat for folks. It's available for pre-order now, and as part of the pre-order incentive for it, people will have access to 2 affinity groups with me. One is well, they're for any Black, Indigenous, person of color, body of culture who want to participate in them. And one will be more geared to how we heal from racial trauma, and a conversation and some practices connected to that. And the other affinity group will focus more on what would it be like to create affinity space, or I'll answer questions for people who are interested in that or doing that work. So there are 2 affinity groups for that. And then there's a launch on August 9th, the day after it comes out, with the contributors who are colleagues and comrades who have been doing this kind of affinity group work for a long time. And so I'm so excited about that. That's next. And in 2024, there's a book coming out published by Shambhala, which is about the kleshas from the Yoga Sutras. And the kleshas are our afflictions and the reasons why we suffer. And so stay tuned. That will come out next summer, a year from now. So I'm writing and teaching and breathing and communing with nature and moving through practices that are we heal together in community with folks. A space for us is the next immediate thing that is upcoming.
Well, thank you so much. This was just a dream come true for me to be able to ask you all great things about your current book as well as your past book, Still in Action. I thank everybody that tuned in. And just this was just such an amazing hour that we had to share space together. So thank you so much to BYTA for allowing us to have these book discussions once every quarter. So everybody stay tuned for future ones. Thank you so much, Michelle, for taking time out for your busy day to sit and chat with us. I'm excited about everything that you have coming up in the future. So BYTA members, make sure that y'all if you're not BYTA members, join BYTA. Make sure to follow us on social media and just see about all the great things that's coming about in the next several months. So thank y'all so much for taking time out your Sunday to join all of us. And thank you so much, Michelle. I hope everybody have a fantastic rest of their Sunday.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, BYTA, again. So lovely to be here. And thanks to everyone for being here.